Practice session. Okay. All right, and we are live. So welcome to the audience who've joined us today. Thank you all very much for joining today's webinar. Apologies for being a little late here, but we'll go ahead and get started with our presentation. My name is William Moore with OJJDP TTA, and before we go through today's webinar, I'd like to just go over a few features of the Cisco WebEx system here to keep in mind throughout today's presentation. So again, welcome everyone. This is the Importance of Working with School Resource Officers webinar. Please note that this webinar is indeed being recorded. Past webinars are archived on NTTAC's YouTube page. If you'd like to get any supporting materials, you can contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. If you're having any trouble accessing any materials or files, please let us know. You can contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at OJJDP@USDOJ.gov. What I'm doing right now is I'm going to go ahead and share a file with the audience. It's a PDF of the webinar for today. So you should see a little box that comes up that says File Transfer, and it will include a PDF of today's presentation. I will also have one of my co-hosts to put in a link where you can access the PDF for the today's presentation in the Google Drive as well. For any optimal audio, please make sure that you dial out through the WebEx phone line. When you're connected, you'll see a phone or a headset icon appear next to your name. If you're having any technical difficulties during today's webinar, please send me, William Moore, the host, and I will be more than happy to help troubleshoot any technical difficulties that you're experiencing. In today's webinar, we will give you all availability to send in your questions. We will try to get to as many questions as we can, but we do have a full schedule today. But when you send in your questions that you have for our presenters, you will just send it in, and please make sure that in the To field you select all panelists so that we make sure that we've gotten your question. Also, make sure that you type it and hit enter or send when sending in your question. Again, please select all panelists. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing in a group, please help us go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. So if you're viewing with one additional colleague, then you will type in +1. So please go to the chat and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. Please note that individuals will receive a certificate of attendance via WebEx within 24 hours. Attendees joining as a part of a group, if you would like to receive a certificate for those additional people, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk, and we can make sure that you get that certificate for any of those additional people that have joined. This is the agenda for today's webinar, just to give you a quick overview of what will be discussed. And that being said, Susan, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to you for today's presentation. And whenever you're ready, you can take it away. And Susan, you may be on mute as well. Sorry.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Coming in loud and clear.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Broderick. I'm actually the director at the National DA's Association on the Juvenile Prosecution Project, and delighted to have you all here. I know we're running a little late, so I just want to let you know that this webinar, I believe, is really coming at a really great moment, because I first came across the concept of school resource officers. I had served as a prosecutor back in Manhattan, but way back before we had SROs. And I've done a lot of work with prosecutors across the country, and I started hearing about school referrals from a number of prosecutors who were like, wait a minute, we're not the vice principals of discipline, and we're getting cases that, you know, we shouldn't. And then I came across the work of Judge Teskey, who was a judge down in Georgia, and he had actually been approached by some school resource officers who were saying, you know what, we're in schools to help keep schools safe, and we're not able to do our job because we're getting, handled cases of disciplinary matters. So one of the things I thought was really important to do was really kind of provide an overview of what school resource officers have been doing, and there's been tremendous strides in, I would say, the last 15 years, and Mo Kennedy, who will be leading us off, is the Executive Director of the National Association of School Resource Officers. We also have, this is where I get bad. So Mo will be leading us off, and we also have, and there's me again. We also have Chris Bryant, who's a School Resource Officer in Hoover, Alabama. Chris has many years' experience as a law enforcement officer. He's also on the front lines as a school resource officer. We have Dr. William Smith, who is the superintendent of the Point Pleasant Beach High School District. And, there he is. There's my friend Anthony, and Anthony Piero, who is a prosecutor. He's the chief of the Juvenile Justice Division, and just a great ally and friend in this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start out, again, providing that overview. Mo's going to give us and tell us about the National Association and the training that school resource officers obtain. And then we're going to talk to the individual stakeholders. And as William said, we're going to try our best to answer all your questions. We have an overwhelming number of people attending. So if we can't get to your questions, you can follow up with us or send me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat. I'm also going to put the email address of Courtney Jan, who is our administrator at NDAA. And we are going to be following up with all the prosecutors that have signed on to invite you to join our mailing list. But anybody else, if you're interested in learning more about the work we're doing at NDAA with prosecutors and other allied professionals in the JJ field, you can send an email to Courtney. So without further ado, we are heading into our presentation. And Mo, let's get down here to the next one. Sorry, I am very technically challenged. So, this is the disclaimer, and here are our learning objectives for the day. And one of the things you're going to see coming across throughout the presentation is the working relationships, and not just between the stakeholders in the justice system, but also building relationships with the youth. So these are our presenters. And take it, Mo. Take it away, Mo.
You were ready to toss that to me, weren't you?
I was.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to join you. As Susan mentioned, my name is Mo Kennedy, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Association of School Resource Officers, going on 10 years and 3 days now. So it's really been an honor to be in this position of serving our association and serving SROs around the country. In case you don't know about NASRO, it's an organization that's been around for 30 years now, and our role has really been to advocate the role of SROs, the proper role of SROs, and to educate school resource officers along with school administrators, and to also provide membership services for thousands of SROs and school safety experts. So if I could get you to go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Some of the training offerings that NASRO has put in place, I'd like to just kind of share those with you. This is coming at an interesting time. We're coming off of last week where our training and curriculum committee spent 3 days together, a combination of virtual and in-person meeting, a very really intensive look at our current courses. We're always willing to update our curriculum, but also really taking a hard look at what are the additional offerings that we need to get out in front of SROs and school administrators. And I think that everything kind of starts with our foundational course, which is our basic SRO course. And it's very important for me to say here that not every person that calls themselves a school resource officer in this country comes to NASRO for training. Certainly I wish they did, because it's a lot easier to speak to the issues that are occurring and to get them up to speed and some level of training that really is something that has some consistency across the board. In other words, just this past week when I'm asked about a couple of SRO situations in Florida, that's one state in particular where I'm not sure what their training is. They don't come to our training. A lot of other states do, so it's a little easier to speak to issues that may occur in other situations. So the basic course, again, is our foundational course. We also offer an advanced SRO course, and typically this is for, of course, the SRO who has already come through the basic course. We offer a supervisors and management course, which may, quite frankly, be one of our more important courses. Because for school resource officers, if they don't have supervisors or folks in that management level position that understand the core concepts of what an SRO should be doing, then that can create some problems for us from the top down. We also, just a few years ago, added an adolescent mental health training course for SROs. It's a 1.5-day workshop. And we're really proud of what we've been able to bring to the table with that particular course. It's not designed to create experts, to turn SROs into mental health experts, but to at least give them some core concepts, some understanding that will hopefully help them to be able to de-escalate situations and identify situations that are going on so that they can help connect students to the proper resources, whether it be a counselor, a mental health specialist, whatever it may be, maybe a school nurse. We also offer a school CEPTED course, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And this course trains SROs and school administrators and others in the school safety world how to actually go and do a crime prevention through environmental design assessment of their own school campus. Can be really, really important. And then finally, the school security officer course is one that we designed a while back for school safety officers, school security officers. And so, again, this is just some of our training offerings that I wanted to share with you. Next slide, please. Just recently, a little over 2 years ago, NASRO put a committee together to really bring to bear all of the lessons that we've learned in now 30 years around standards and best practices for school resource officer programs. There are a number of things that have to happen for an SRO program to be successful. And I want to share three of those things kind of in the concept of a three-legged stool, if you will, and imagine the idea that if one of those legs is missing, the stool can't stand. One of the core concepts, one of the most important things is that the SRO must be carefully selected. I think those of you who are listening in to this webinar are well aware that working in a school environment is not necessarily for every law enforcement officer. It takes a special skill set. It takes a special personality. It's really, when you think about it, it's the most unique assignment in law enforcement. There really is nothing else like it. And so it does take a unique person, a unique officer to be able to do this particular assignment. So they have to be very carefully selected, and we recommend within these best practices that it's veteran officers that are selected. This is not really an assignment for a brand new SRO or a brand new officer, if you will. So we want to make sure it's a veteran, that we know their work history. We know that if there's any discipline history, we also know about their history in terms of volunteering and working with youth. Those kind of things that can help us select the right person to really be able to fit this role very well. The second thing I want to speak to in terms of that three-legged stool is the idea of specific training. SROs have to be specifically trained how to work in the school environment. And some of the things that we don't think about sometimes, but we should be thinking about all the time, are things along the lines of adolescent brain development. When we can help SROs, help officers better understand what's going on there, again, it gives us a better opportunity to connect with the students and to de-escalate incidents that may be occurring if we understand that teen brain development and what's going on there. Things like implicit bias, understanding how that can be a barrier for an SRO. School law, understanding the unique aspects of the law and what it means in the school environment, such as with search and seizure. It's a little bit different in that environment. And then the third leg of that stool would really be collaboration. And that means between the school district and the law enforcement agency at all levels, from top to bottom. If that collaboration is not right, if that relationship is not right, then we're going to have problems in this situation. We're talking about bringing law enforcement into the school environment. Again, a very special circumstance that requires tremendous collaboration. Next slide. So what is a school resource officer? And there actually is a federal definition, and I believe in the next slide we actually have the definition laid out, and I won't insult you by reading it to you. I'm just going to make three very important points out of this. When someone identifies themselves as an SRO, there are three things that we need to know. Are they a sworn certified law enforcement officer? I've run across security officers, if you will, non-sworn security personnel that will refer to themselves as an SRO. And unless they're a sworn certified law enforcement officer, then it does not fit the definition. So that's point one that I want to make sure we're really clear on. The second point is this. For an SRO program to be effective, for the officer to be effective, it has to be a community-oriented policing approach. This can't be a situation where, hey, we're having a drug problem or we're having whatever the problem is, we need the police to come in and solve this for us. That never works. It has to be a community-oriented policing approach. We train SROs on day one that the most important thing they're going to do is build relationships in that school environment, bridging the gap between law enforcement and youth. The relationship has to be the key. And you'll find from the Averted School Violence Database at the National Police Foundation, it makes the point for us. When there are good relationships, that leads to good conversations with students, with faculty, with parents, and it winds up becoming sometimes very good intelligence for an SRO, for a good SRO to be able to track that down and to stop an act of violence before it ever occurs. That's when we're at our best. So community-oriented policing with a focus on relationships is critically important. And then finally, collaboration, which I've already spoken to, but we can't talk enough about it. It has to be the foundation. So that's our definition of a school resource officer, just to make sure that we're clear on that. Okay? Next. Kind of a reality check, and I use these two images to say, I think there's a lot of distortions about who we are. I think there's a lot of false claims about who we are. I think these two images help to size up who we are. And, I can speak mostly for the members of our association, again, because I know how they're trained and I know what kind of membership services they receive from us. These two images, I think, say it all. Are we perfect in this situation? No, no one is. But I love seeing SROs interact with students. They're there to have a positive impact on the lives of students. And these are just two images that really bring us to that reality check and help remind me of who we are. Okay, next. Just as I mentioned, bridging the gap. This is, in any given day when we see a negative story about an SRO in the media, we can go, if we're willing, to go and look for thousands of other examples of these types of things that SROs are doing all day long, every day. I wish these made the news a little bit more than the incident that happens occasionally. But I just wanted to share that with you. And again, can't speak enough about the importance of bridging the gap. The SRO triad concept is foundational to the way we train officers, the way we advocate for them. It has everything to do with the way it's laid out in best practices. And when we think about the SRO triad concept, we've spoken to the fact that the SRO has to be a certified law enforcement officer, and you see that here at the foundation of this triangle, of this triad. And so we have to make sure that SROs are properly trained in terms of how to utilize their role as a law enforcement officer in the school environment. Next slide. The next side of the SRO triad concept is kind of the role of education, being involved in the educational process. Good SROs can have a lot to offer in the classroom environment through law-related education. And when you think about law-related education, that's a pretty big umbrella. And I think about some of the things that I used to like to do as an SRO, especially with driving age students. I used to love to educate them on what to do if you're stopped by law enforcement, in your vehicle. What your responsibilities are and how to respond and react. So again, just a lot of different things under that umbrella that can help us to really be effective in the classroom. Next slide. Then the role of informal counselor or mentor. And that role is really meant to be informal when it comes to the counselor piece. Schools have their own counselors, and we agree schools need more counselors. We love partnering with counselors and with mental health specialists and other professionals in that school environment. But the SRO really does have a great opportunity to do some great mentor work and do some informal counseling with students all day long, and even with teachers and with parents. So that's the SRO triad concept in a nutshell. Okay, next.
Thanks, Mo. And, one of the things that we are working on with this award that we have from OJJDP is, we're working to support juvenile prosecutors, but as every juvenile prosecutor knows, that their job relies predominantly on building relationships with the other stakeholders. And with the events of 2020, and we were realizing that there were a lot of problems in communities across the country. And one of the things I did was reach out to one of my former colleagues. He's still a colleague, George Mosey from Philadelphia. And George has done a lot of work. He was a prosecutor. He's now the executive director of a gang and anti-drug initiative in Philadelphia. And he said to me, the most important thing we can all be doing right now at the juvenile court level is building relationships, and especially building relationships between police and youth. And I know that with this topic, SROs are one of those police officer groups that really do, or there is tremendous potential to build relationships. So as we go forward now, we're going to talk to 3 people who are on the ground doing this, and these are the topics that we're going to be addressing is who are the necessary stakeholders in this work, what are the critical elements of a successful working relationship, based on the work you're doing, and what lessons have been instrumental. And so Chris Bryant, who is our SRO in Alabama. And Chris, would you like to talk about the work you're doing and what you can share in terms of who you believe the necessary stakeholders are and what are the critical elements of relationship building?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you for having me. My whole job, relationships, like Mo discussed. I use this analogy. Real estate is all about location. SRO work's all about relationships. It's relationships with the kids, the admin, the parents, juvenile court, the attorneys, the juvenile cases. It's all intertwined. And the most important thing is to gain trust, and that takes time for an SRO. To establish in a school and to get to know the stakeholders. And I'm an advocate of you selectively place an SRO into a school that he needs to stay in there as long as he is doing a good job. It took me at least 5 years. An SRO for 16. It took me about 5 to garner the relationships that I needed to be effective in my school. And the big one is with the kids. That's the basis. So you're just not another uniform walking the halls, or just another uniform to them. They have to know that you're there for them and that you care. That I treat all my students. We have about 3,000 students at Hoover High School. It's the largest high school in the state of Alabama, and I look at them as I have 3,000 kids. They're my kids first. That transcends color, ethnicity, religion, or anything. They're just my kids. I'm their protector. I'm there for them, period. Once you can establish that and get some trust of some students, word spreads. You have to get the trust of your admin and teachers to let them know you're not in there just to spy on kids and hook them up whenever that's not my job. I don't care if I ever have to arrest a kid. I have to. And that leads into with the juvenile court, family court, and with the DAs, the relationship that I have built with them. If I bring them a case, they know it's a good case, because I just don't bring frivolent cases to them. It's going to be a good, solid case. Everything is there for them, and we proceed from there. And if they want to, play it out with my permission, and because they always ask, they always want to make sure that I'm satisfied and happy, and so is my school system. But it takes time for that. It takes, multiple meetings, going to workshops that they put on, engaging them and asking questions. Periodically, our DAs will put on like juvenile law updates or on mental health issues. And I would urge any SRO that's listening right now to go to everything that you can and get to know these people, get to know the probation officers. So when you got a kid that not necessarily we have the information that they're on probation, but the kid tells us, hey, I'm on probation. Who's your probation officer? Miss Moon. Well, I can call Miss Moon because I have her phone number. That kind of, and I have a relationship with her. So it takes time for an SRO to get the relationships built that they need to build.
That's great. And you know what, can I ask in terms, and we've had a lot of questions submitted prior to the webinar, in terms of, have things changed because of COVID? Has your role as an SRO changed because of COVID?
The only thing that's changed for me as far as being an SRO, there's a lot less kids in school. We have about a third that are virtual, and then right now our high school's on a split schedule. So any given day, we have a third of the kids there, which is really nice. You can actually walk the halls, and it's more of an intimate setting now than having 3,000 kids there all at one time.
But has that been leading to any issues? Because I know SROs are sometimes involved in addressing truancy issues. So there were some questions that some of the participants had about if SROs are encountering any problems because of virtual learning and truancy.
I have not. We have someone from our school board that handles the truancy issues in the courts side of that. We might be asked to do a home check with them if they feel like something is not right. But as far as that being part of my everyday job, that's not something that's not in my purview.
Okay, thanks. Well, next we're going to go to Anthony Piero, and Anthony works very closely with Dr. Smith, who's the superintendent at the Point Pleasant High School. So, Anthony, in terms of the 3 questions we have here, in terms of necessary stakeholders, critical elements of a successful relationship, and lessons learned, do you have any overall thoughts, or do you want to go, because I know you have an example of the memorandum of law that you're operating under. So how would you like to start out?
No, I could just start talking right here. And Dr. Smith is obviously going to help me out as well. In terms of the necessary stakeholders, I would recommend, so just my background, I've been a county prosecutor for 21 years now. And as a county prosecutor, I found it to be incredibly important, as Chris said, as being involved in the SRO program, knowing who the school resource officers are, knowing the selection process, knowing what it means to be a school resource officer so that we can be supportive in a way that's helpful to them as well as the school district. And for me, it was immediately, when I ended up in this role, it was immediately apparent that that was necessary because relationships, as Chris said, are so important when we are building these SRO programs. And there is an example that I am going to give, but I want to just, really talk about two things that Chris said that I found in terms of these three questions to be incredibly valuable. Mo had mentioned it as well. Number one, the careful selection of who the school resource officers is so critically important. School policing is different than other policing. And I think that there are so many examples of that. And a law enforcement officer who is not, who doesn't want the assignment is the wrong person to then get the assignment. It's also important that that person have an opportunity to be there and to thrive in the role if they want to be there. And, those are some of the critical elements of a successful relationship is the time. We oftentimes we're seeing a lot of turnover in the SROs. And when there's turnover, you are starting from the beginning, despite some of the great relationships you may have, because now you're adding a new personality and a new person into that mix. And the more we can limit turnover, the better relationships we're going to have. Now, that doesn't mean that you become a school resource officer, that it is the only assignment that you'll ever have. But it is really important that when you accept the assignment, that you go into it thinking that it may be the last assignment that I have, that this is going to be the path that my career takes. And those are questions, and I know that both Mo, especially from his position as an administrator in the police department, and now as the executive director, those are questions that we want to know prior to the assignment of an SRO into a school. Because if you're there because you're retiring in 6 months, if you're there because it sounds like you get the summers off and that's a great gig, or you're there for other reasons, it's the wrong assignment. This is hard work. This is difficult. It's a special type of policing, and that exists all over the police fields, right? We have SWAT officers, and they're trained specifically for SWAT situations, and school officers are specifically trained for school situations, and the good ones do it phenomenally well. The good ones create phenomenal school districts and places where kids thrive and the school thrives in those relationships. But to these questions, you have to engage your administrators. Dr. Smith is a superintendent. I can't do anything without Dr. Smith on board, and I mean that because it is his school, right? It's his district. He has policies that he's going to implement, and we have to be partners in this program. So the superintendents, your chief school administrators are critical. Your building principals are really important because they're handling the day-to-day operations of the school. Your building vice principals, some of the teachers. What we try to do locally is train and get involved as many people as possible so that we're all speaking the same language. We're all working off of the same framework and understanding. And what we do is we try to train together in that regard. And in terms of lessons that I have found to be instrumental is that it's not only is it relationships, but it's communication. We constantly have to communicate with one another. We constantly have to learn from one another because as long as I have been a juvenile prosecutor, I am not a school board attorney. And as long as Dr. Smith has been a superintendent, he has never been an SRO or a prosecutor. So I need to learn from him and he needs to learn from me. And I mean it in regard to everything. If a law changes, if something is different, if the school has a different expectation, we have to communicate. And I would say communication is critical in terms of lessons that I learned over the last 21 years.
Great. And I know that you and the superintendent, and we can go to this next slide is you've entered into this memorandum of agreement between education and law enforcement officials. So, and Dr. Smith, I just wanted to ask if there was anything you wanted to add, and actually we'll go back to these critical questions with regard to necessary stakeholders or the critical elements, or any lessons that you think you've learned that have been instrumental that you'd like to share with our participants.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. And I'll be brief because I don't want to just repeat what I've heard from Anthony or Mo or Chris. I mean, they're really making points that are so that resonate so much for me and our experience in district. But I think, one of the key things from a school leadership standpoint that I think makes this work is viewing this as an opportunity to broaden your palette of resources. So when I'm, leading the superintendent's roundtable and Anthony speaks at every single one of those, and sometimes he's joined by the prosecutor, and we're having conversations about what's happening, on a county level, we're not always talking about law enforcement. We're talking about what's happening with our kids. And it's an absolute conversation about wellness, mental health issues, what's going on with substance. I mean, we were kind of the core of the opioid issue right here in Jersey. We were absolutely dealing with that head on, and the ripple effect was gigantic for us. And so looking at everything as an opportunity to include our law enforcement rather than exclude, whether that's freshman orientation, whether that's a bicycle rodeo, whether that's an opportunity to, have parents do a Q&A with law enforcement, so that our conversations, when we do get to matters of potentially discipline or law involvement or whatever, our SRO is a familiar face. He's an expected voice at the table for parents, to the point where some kids will request that he be present. So that's absolutely something that I would add. The other piece that's really important in our process is the superintendent had a seat at the table for the selection of the SRO. Mo made some really good points about how SROs are selected and that they should be long-term and they should not be at the tail end of their career necessarily. But just the fact that conversation is happening with the town council, with the superintendent, with the chief of police, with the SRO, him or herself, that's a really important perspective. That this is going to be a shared experience for good or for ill. In our case, it's been fabulous, but I think those are things that should be part of that conversation. Most certainly the opportunity to look for opportunities to extend that relationship rather than getting into a situation where you're potentially saying, hey, is this something where we should be involving the police or the department? Hey, this is a place where our SRO can be an asset. How? Let's work on that together.
Yeah. And you know what? The conversation is reminding me of another colleague who worked in Cook County. He was a prosecutor, and they actually were doing some of their school cases. They would refer to a restorative justice program called the Peace Circle. And there was an incident involving a young girl assaulting the SRO. And when the SRO and the young girl had a really positive relationship. And when they sat down to talk about it, it turned out that she felt that he was like the one person who always had her back. And in this particular instance, that's why she reacted, because she felt like he wasn't listening to her side of the story. And he sat there, and actually the prosecutor told me he ended up having tears in his eyes, and he's like, so I can't tell his name because he would kill me, but it was an actual bonding experience. And the whole concept of restorative justice, and we did have a question on that Mo indicated he would like to address. So Mo, would you like to talk about the concept of SROs and restorative justice, and then we'll get back to Anthony and Dr. Smith talking about the memorandum and why it's important?
I sure would, Susan, and I appreciate the opportunity. I had actually, during my presentation, and I guess it was about toward the end of Chris's presentation, I just noticed the chat box and that people were putting comments and asking questions in there. And James Vautier, and James, I apologize if I'm butchering your last name, but he put one in here. It was a fantastic question, and I'm gonna almost accuse him of stealing a line that I've used, and that's okay if you did. Maybe he came up with it and I stole it somewhere down the line, but he asked a question about what is everyone's take on the concept of restorative justice or practice, and why are so many educators and police against it? And so let me address this question first, and then I'll address the statement. And I don't know that so many educators and police are against it. I think from my standpoint, it's something I've been looking at for a really long time, and I've been really engaged with Dr. Bernie James, who is from Pepperdine University and does a lot of work with us. Asking what you think of restorative justice is a complex question, and part of the reason is because there are a lot of different strategies out there around restorative justice. Some of them, I think, have a really good opportunity to do some good things, and then some concern me because I get a little concerned about victims' rights and all of this. And that's something I think everyone can get on board with, that we can't trample on victims' rights as we try to take this approach of restorative justice or restorative practice. So I'm not, going to throw rocks at it by any means. I think that there are some good strategies out there, and I also got to spend a lot of time with Judge Teskey over the years and admire some of the things that he has kind of pioneered. But I loved James' statement at the end. He says, as a 10-year SRO, I was doing restorative practice before it was named. And I think that's the line I'm talking about, that I can remember as an SRO that we were already doing some of these things before it was ever named. And Chris could speak to that as well. When it comes to arrest, a carefully selected, specifically trained SRO, just like Chris is talking about, arrest is the last thing any of us want to do. I engage with our members all over the country. I used to get to engage with them in their schools a little bit more, but of course the last year has fouled that up. And I always like to ask one question, and Chris knows I've asked this question of him before. How many students did you arrest last year? And I'm talking about on-view, physically arrested students, not a court order, but an on-view arrest. And the majority of our members that I engage with need less than 5 fingers on one hand, even at the end of a year. For many, it's 0. So I think this restorative practice has been taking place, again, as James said, for a really long time among SROs. So thanks for letting me address that.
Thanks, Mo. And so now we're going to get over to, because mentioning Judge Teskey, I remember speaking to him, and he was telling me that, like I said in the beginning, he was approached by the SROs who said, we don't want to be on these, discipline cases. And so Judge Teskey gathered the prosecutor, the defender, probation, schools, and they all had a meeting, and they came up with an agreement as to which offenses would be eligible for court and which offenses really had to stay in the school. And at the time, there were a lot of discipline cases, especially where there were arguments in the school, and the charge would come into the judge as making terroristic threats. So after they had this meeting, and the judge said, the next case I have regarding making terroristic threats, if it doesn't involve the Department of Homeland Security, I'm dismissing it, and you can resolve that in the school. So Anthony and Dr. Smith, I know we have a copy, and we're going to go through some of the high points of your memorandum. And if you could just tell us how this memorandum came to be.
Sure. Thank you, Susan. And so this is a statewide memorandum of agreement. And I want to explain a little bit about how New Jersey works, because you're going to have to work obviously within the rules of your state. But the way that New Jersey works is that the county prosecutor is the chief law enforcement officer of that county, and therefore has supervisory authority over the local municipalities. That allows our office and me to be involved as well, as I had mentioned earlier, in not the direct selection of the SRO, but communication with the chief about what we're looking for in the selection of an SRO. Over each county prosecutor, we have 21 counties in New Jersey, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the entire state. So the Attorney General has direct supervisory authority overall 21 county prosecutors. So there's a very well settled chain of command, and we all report to the Attorney General at the end of the day. Same on the side of the Department of Education. The Department of Education is the state chief as it relates to schools. So in 1988, actually, those two entities decided to meet to come up with a uniform memorandum of agreement that would be in place that was between education and law enforcement. And the foresight in 1988 to create this document was extraordinary, because what this does is it puts every school district, and just by way of funny story, I say it's a uniform state memorandum because every law enforcement agency in the state and every school district needs to comply with this. And I've reached out to other counties, and I might be looking for something, and and this has actually happened to me. Well, we don't follow the memorandum of agreement. And I reply, yes, actually you do. You just don't know it, and you need to know it. And it's a great starting place for the relationships that we're talking about. Every time there are legal changes to our law, to our statutes, to issues that are affecting our community, this memorandum of agreement gets updated. So I want to say about 2016 or so, there was an anti-bullying Bill of Rights that was passed in New Jersey. The memorandum working group got together and discussed, okay, how does this fit within our uniform memorandum of agreement so that we can each address bullying in a school environment where it's going to affect obviously the school and law enforcement to the same degree. And in 2019 was the last set of revisions, but I would say every 5 to 7 years, the work group gets together, discusses issues, and actually debates them, because you have members from law enforcement and you have members from the school community. And we get together and basically talk about how these things can be handled and should be handled. And what this does is, again, it puts everybody in the same frame of reference. It puts everybody together. So when you reference any issue that could come up in a school, it's highlighted here. For purposes of today, as you said, Susan, these are some of the highlights. This is actually a 71-page document. And it goes through, and I think on the next slide, Susan, it goes through, okay, so that's what it is. Everything we address is of issues of mutual concern. So if you're from the Department of Education, you can bring forward issues that you want addressed by the working group to incorporate into the memorandum of agreement. If you're on the side of law enforcement, you can do the same thing. And again, it allows those entities to communicate. But the next slide has all of the things that are covered in the memorandum of agreement. There is nothing that you can find that is not covered in the memorandum. I know I went through a lot of the questions that were asked prior to the webinar, and some of them were exactly addressed in our memorandum and are talked about well before the incident happened. And I think that's what's important is, as Dr. Smith said, you want to do these things and have these relationships before you have to talk about something that could be pretty important in terms of whether law enforcement needs to be involved. What we do in New Jersey, and I think it's important that the memorandum includes this, is that it requires training together. So what we did in 2018, Dr. Smith obviously was part of it, and we do it all the time, but we just made it a little bit more formal in 2018. We brought together SROs, chiefs of police, and chief school administrators, and we trained on the entire 71-page document. This way, they were hearing the same information, whether you sat as the chief school administrator, or you sat as the chief of police, or the school resource officer. You were hearing the same information at the same time by the same presenter. And that allows us, again, to really communicate using the same words, language, and ability to get to the issues at hand. And it's really I would recommend this, if you can't get a statewide memorandum, to at least have memorandums in your community. Because while we did that big training in 2018, and I intend to do it again this year, every year, the chief of police and the chief school administrator are required to sit down together to go over these things. It's included in the MOA. It's a required piece of this. So every year you're communicating with the chief and the superintendent, again, so that you're addressing the issues that come up and that will come up in the course of a school year. So next slide, Susan. This just talks about some of the things that we wanted to do. And the last piece, the third piece is what I'm going to highlight today, is we wanted to clarify what does it mean to report something to law enforcement and what does it mean to consult with law enforcement? Because our memorandum of agreement in New Jersey requires certain things that are required mandatory reporting is what we call them. And they are some of your more serious interactions that may occur in the school. And I want to be clear about reporting. And I say this to every law enforcement officer that I speak with. Reporting something does not mean that law enforcement loses its ability to exercise its discretion. So the school might have a mandatory report for an offense that takes place in the school or on school grounds. That does not mean that the law enforcement officer has to sign a criminal complaint or has to take any action. The law enforcement officer, with their own training, can decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to just talk to this young person. I have a relationship with them, and kind of we'll talk it out. They can do anything within their jurisdiction and within their discretion. It does not have to result in a charge. And I think saying that out loud to law enforcement gives them that ability and that, again, power and authority to do what they know and what they're trained to do. Consultation. What we didn't want to have is the inability of the school and the law enforcement officers to communicate. So we really are big on communication, and we just defined consultation. You could always talk to your building principal. You can always talk to your school resource officer, kick things around, talk about things, and that doesn't have to rise to the level of reporting. And we did that because in the state, some of these reporting requirements, you have to report those. And we didn't want it to be every time you spoke to your school resource officer, every time the resource officer spoke to the superintendent, that it was a reportable offense for purposes of the memorandum of agreement. So I'm just going to pause here for a second and ask Dr. Smith, in regard to the training, if anything that you wanted to add in regard to the training that we did.
First of all, I think that the training was fabulous as far as its value. I think when you go in and you say, hey, I've heard this before, or this sounds familiar, that's a sign that things are working. And, the prosecutor's office has been extremely consistent in its message. Your point about discretion couldn't be more significant in this conversation, because the times that I can think of, and I think back the last 10 or 15 issues that we've had communication through our SRO to your office, you have kicked it back and said, hey, you guys, I feel confident in what you have planned here, your intervention strategies. If it's only about locking up, throwing the book, filing a charge, you've lost the whole point of the SRO. That ability to mentor, to intervene, to be a tool of de-escalation, to be starting from a message of, hey, we know you're a child. You are going to make mistakes. And so let's help you walk through that process and navigate what happens when you do make this mistake inevitably, as opposed to there is one path and that path is leading to something that's going to be a really unfortunate consequence for you. That's a really distinct element. And I think it's that the training reinforced that message, but I know you and I have had conversations, and obviously with the superintendents in the county, the central message is we want to be not seen as a deterrent organization through penalty, but rather an intervention organization that is looking to allow you the flexibility to have your tools to remedy situations at the home level, at the school level. And a lot of times that's a delicate dance between, the SRO and the school district, but one that we're often seeing eye to eye on.
Yeah, and I think just to echo that, Susan, one of the things we had talked about earlier, and I see in some of the questions, is about, relationships and collaboration. I just want to go back to the way that I tried to tackle that. So when I became, again, the chief juvenile attorney here, I thought school relationships was one of the most important things that I was going to be involved with, because I think that what happens in the school is incredibly important. I have been a supporter of NASROs and the work that they do for years. We've brought them here to train our school resource officers. And to me, it's just an important relationship to have. But one of the first things that I did was get to know our school superintendents, was really to reach out and to communicate and to tell them who I was and what our vision was for handling these cases. And of course, I do that with our county prosecutor support. And once you start to begin to develop those relationships, and Will said it earlier, but they have, in Ocean County, they have school superintendent roundtable meetings where the superintendents get together every month and they discuss issues that are, related and important to their work. And I'm now an invited guest to every monthly meeting. And as Will said earlier, I don't just go there to talk about, hey, how many arrests took place in the school. We're talking about our community, our kids, the things that we need to focus on. Because Will, if he's heard me say this once, he's heard me say it a million times. You tell me what you need from me, and I'm going to do it. And if that means addressing an SRO about maybe, about an issue, I'm going to do that. If it's about school security and safety, I'm going to do that. If it's about COVID and how our kids are reacting in the time of COVID, I'm going to do that. And we're going to help out. And it's actually funny anymore because I sit on the whole meeting. Half the time I don't know what they're talking about, but just in case, just in case any questions for me come up. And then as Will obviously knows, he and I together co-chair our school justice partnership in the county because it got to the point where we wanted to incorporate all of this into a partnership. So Will and I co-chair that, and he'll come to my juvenile officers meetings. He'll come obviously as the co-chair to those partnership meetings. And then Will and I are able to communicate about that partnership and what we can see for our county as a whole, moving forward. And all that started with, honestly, reaching out. This is who I am. This is why it's important. And not being, not being confrontational in a way that I had seen prior to some of the involvement, prior to some of the things we're talking about where, that might be your school, but this is my town and I'm coming in unannounced, or we're doing, this without telling you. It has to be a partnership. And the MOA, and if you could build them, again, start small if that's what you need to do, it allows us to constantly redirect each other if it ever comes to that. And it doesn't, as Will said, we're always on the same page. But, all right, well, we need to do this. How do we do that? And I see some of the questions about FERPA. And what's interesting about our memorandum of agreement is that it addresses FERPA. And it addresses what's a pupil record. And what we've done in New Jersey through the memorandum is we've created what we call law enforcement units. And the school will appoint somebody to that unit, and obviously the SRO is part of that. And it allows the free information exchange without violating FERPA because they're not considered pupil records for purposes of the Act. And that lets me talk to Will about things that are happening in the school, and for Will to talk to me about things that are happening without violating any other confidentiality provisions that exist in the law.
And you know what? It's exactly what Chris Bryant said in the beginning. In real estate, it's location, location, location. Here, we're talking about relationships. Okay, and I know we technically we're an hour, but we do have we still have 30 minutes here. So for those of you who would like to continue on with us, we'll finish going through the memorandum and then get to some of the questions. And those questions that we don't have time for, again, we have in the chat box the information you can send to Courtney Jan at NDAA. And also, I just want to add, because as we're having this conversation, I'm like, oh my God, there's so many different aspects of this so I'm hoping that we can turn this into more of a webinar series because I feel like each of the issues that are being brought up in the questions deserve their own webinar. And so when you're completing the evaluation for this, if you'd like to put in particularly what issues you'd like to see in future webinars, please do that. Okay, let's just get back to communication and relationships.
Well, and I want to highlight, Susan, I'll start, sure. And then I'm going to turn it over again to Will. And I see that it's one of the questions, and of course I'm more than happy to share the memorandum of agreement. It is a public document. It's a statewide document, obviously, so I can forward that along to everybody at NTTAC and make sure that all participants have it. One of the questions, though, talks about consultation and communication. And one of the things that our memorandum does, and I find it to be incredibly important, is it allows for communication on and off school grounds after hours as well. And again, what's important here is just because you're consulting with one another does not mean that anything has to happen. So there might be a legal incident not on school grounds in the community on a Saturday night. But we all know that Monday morning, when everybody gets to school, it's really important that the school have that information because you want to have a safe school environment as well. So we are able, through our memorandum of agreement, to communicate with, Will, and the chief may call Will, or the school resource officer may call him and say, hey, look, just so you know, on Saturday night, this really serious incident took place on the weekend. May just be something for you to pay attention to in terms of school safety on Monday. It also allows Will on Friday afternoon to say, just so you know, this kind of happened at the end of the day, and we just want to let you know in the event that it spills out over into the community. And neither party needs to do anything in terms of their traditional roles, right? I'm not giving that information to Will so that he can impose school discipline, and he's not giving it to us so we can go and arrest people. It's so that we're working together as a community to intervene in the event that anything actually were to happen. One of the things we were able to build off of this was what we call, and it's again a statewide initiative, a handle with care. And I see that Officer Crotty, who's also from Ocean County, just posted that. Our handle with care program allows, and what it requires, is that every incident that results in a traumatic event to a student, is that information is provided to the school so that they know that this event took place. So if there is a search warrant that's executed on a high school, any student of any, the age is defined, but I'll use high school as an example. If there's a search warrant that takes place at a residence and there's school-age children there, the police are required to notify the school, not that the incident took place. They don't give the information. They just relay that a traumatic incident happened at that kid's school in the event that that youth comes to school Monday despondent or different or a little bit more, either angry or sad or whatever emotion they're experiencing, so that the school understands that, okay, there was some interaction with the police, and it doesn't have to be them. It doesn't have to be the student. It can be any family member. And we're just big on communication because it allows us to build these relationships, again, so that we're always picking up the phone and calling each other with the right frame of mind. So, Will, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I just want to add one piece of color commentary to that because you're citing an excellent example. I don't know on a Saturday or Sunday, it seems to be a race as to whether my high school principal or our SRO is going to call me, which is about things that have happened, potentially would happen, potentially are going to impact us on Monday. But what that tells me is both that our SRO is in active communication with our principal, that our principal wants to contact me, which is great, but also that our SRO is in contact with me. How that, the degree to which that helps us operate a safe and stable building it cannot be quantified. And some of these incidents might be a domestic violence situation where you say, well, that's pretty far from a school day. How's that really going to impact us? The reality is that line is so open that we're hearing about everything that's happening in the community that potentially is going to turn a kid, just like Anthony said, just set a mood, potentially set off some violence. Oftentimes it's parties and post consequences there. But the fact that the phone call is immediate and that it's to school leadership and district leadership is just, it's extremely valuable to us. And it is, it doesn't happen unless that relationship is forged and the trust is there. And the other side of that too is that oftentimes, if we're receiving tips from concerned parents or concerned students, or our SRO is, we're able to work together. Again, not so much to look to file a charge or impose school discipline, but to head things off, to intervene, things that you do on a routine basis at a school level, where you might be mediating a brewing conflict, or just, grabbing a kid by the collar and saying, hey, let's talk a little bit about some choices, that might not be wise coming up.
And that's the other thing that the communication allows, Susan. I'll say this briefly. Will had talked earlier about resources. As the county prosecutor, we're also involved in a lot of different things in the community, and we're able to provide resources to the schools as well. One of the things, and it's funny, Will and I had been laughing about this not too long ago, it's almost an overwhelming number of resources now that are being provided to the schools because of our school justice partnership. So when we have those meetings, it's this program is available and this program is available, and if you have this, you could refer the young person there. And it just puts everybody, again, in a frame of intervention in a positive way instead of what I think, unfortunately, is normally discussed in the media, because there are so many positive things that school personnel are doing every day with their school resource officer. And I know Mo had said this long ago, and I don't want to, obviously if he wants to comment on it, but that police officer is one of the most well-known police officers in your community. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen in my community that resource officer is so well looked upon by the young people in the community. They like that person. We just had an SRO retire last year, and the going away party that the kids had for that resource officer, it actually took my breath away. It was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen, because they're going to miss him in that role. They relied upon him being there every day, and it's just really that's the heartwarming stuff that we're talking about, is those relationships, that ability to connect with a young person in a way, in a different way than maybe some other teachers or anybody else. And I know everybody has their own relationships, but it's really nice to have positive relationships with law enforcement.
Yep. Okay, so we'll go through the rest of these slides and then get to some of the questions. So,
yeah, so the only thing I'll say about these, and we could jump, through them pretty quickly, is I talked about the law enforcement units. This allows us to identify issues. It allows us to develop trainings together. As I said, Will and I talk about, all right, what do we need to train on? We were able to consult on school safety security plans. Okay, what do we, similar to some of the things Mo had mentioned before, the memorandum requires it. So we're doing those things, obviously. Next slide. So I want to just highlight some of the things that were mandatory reports. We obviously have things that are mandatory and non-mandatory. The reason I highlighted some of the ones that were mandatory is to say two different things. Number one, mandatory report just requires the communication. It does not require law enforcement to take any action. But these are things that are happening in the school that are really important to communicate, that the school resource officer is aware of, so that they can, in their role, again, as I had mentioned earlier, knowing what programs are available in the community, knowing some of the consequences of being involved in juvenile delinquency, they can actually intervene even before. So this does not require that charges be filed. It simply requires the communication. So you can keep flipping through these. Yeah, and that's what I say right there. You can use all your diversion options. You can just talk. You can mentor. One of the stories that I tell all the time is a student who had transferred schools, and in his new school, he was a very, very good athlete, and he had taken the starting position from one of the more popular kids in the school. And the school resource officer walked around with him for about 3 years to make sure that he wasn't, because the student went to the resource officer and said, look, I'm getting picked on every day. Somebody is saying something to me every day, and I'm afraid about how I might react to that. And the resource officer would walk with him between classes, would talk to the other kids. This kid ended up going off to play Division I college football and had a very good football career, and actually credits the SRO with allowing him to have that career because he was concerned about how he would have reacted without the SRO's involvement. That's just some of the things that SROs are out there doing. So I think the rest of it, Susan, we can get right to the questions. I know the time. This just highlights, and again, I encourage you all to, like I said, I'm happy to share this. These, again, allow that relationship building and allow that communication to be had because, I said it before and I'll repeat it because I think it bears it. Will, as his role as a superintendent, knows things that obviously I don't know. And I, in my role as a prosecutor, have to deal with things that Will doesn't have to deal with. Allowing us to speak the same language when it comes to this stuff helps the relationship. It helps the professionalism. It helps us to go to a document that says, okay, let's read this together and let's do this together. And I found it to be more valuable than I could possibly say in just a short period of time. So, but that was it. I think the rest of it, Susan, was, again, more of the same, so we can get to the questions.
Okay, great. And actually, Mo, I'd like to get back. There was a question about, well, first of all, John Rosiak shared that he had written something for NASRO about SROs during COVID. And so if we can get a copy of that, I'll distribute it or we'll have it sent through NTTAC to the attendees so we can help with that. But Mo, I know that recently there have been conversations about maybe replacing SROs with counselors. And I was just wondering if, Nasro has a position on that, or if you or Chris want to comment on that.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm an advocate for counselors. I'm an advocate for mental health specialists. Quite frankly, they're our teammates. And so I'm not going to suggest for 1 minute that we shouldn't have more counselors, more school nurses. But we're part of the team as well. Right. So the idea of pitting us one against another, I don't understand that. That's quite frankly a little confusing. So we would never advocate for less counselors. They're important. Right. I think over the last few decades, where we have carefully selected and specifically trained SROs, they have become as important to that team as anyone else, and not more important, as important. They're an incredibly valuable teammate. So certainly we're going to advocate for school counselors. That's critically important to students. I hope that helps.
Okay. And there was another comment and sort of a question about, dealing with rogue SROs. And, we know in any profession there are good and bad people, and, we seem to hear about the bad cases, which of course are a tragedy. And I don't think anybody's probably more upset about seeing an SRO who did the wrong thing than SROs, because, and I think it goes back to what you've all been saying about who we're selecting for these positions, making sure that they're properly trained. And there's been some questions about the training opportunities that are available. And I guess from a national perspective, Mo, if you wanted to share if participants want to get more information about training, and then we can see what's available at the state level as well.
Sure. And that's talking about the training issue. That's what I'd like to see more consistency across the nation in terms of how SROs are trained. I will say there's not only our training, but there's great training at the state level too. SROs, first of all, before I get to the rogue question, SROs really should have more training, not less. I hate to see a situation when I hear from a chief or a sheriff or an SRO themselves that, hey, I've had the 40-hour basic course. Well, why just have one course that, take the national course, get a national view of this and a national level. Take your state course. Absolutely. Let's get SROs as well trained as we can get them. We can never have enough training. The issue and the question posed, I'm not sure where that's coming from, about rogue SROs. Certainly in law enforcement or any other career path, we wind up with folks that occasionally shouldn't have made their way into our profession, right? We all know that, whatever career you're in. But we also sometimes, and I know I have to deal with this, I get a call from the media or from someone else wanting me to judge an SRO situation based on a 10 or 11 second video snippet. And my answer always is to that, I just really don't have a lot to say about it until I see the context. What happened that led up to this? What is it that we're really seeing? Just last week in one of the Florida incidents, I was pressed on trying to judge that situation. And until all the context is there and the investigation is complete, it's an impossible thing to do, quite frankly, and it's an unfair thing to do. So the thing that I realize is that by and large, most of the SROs out there, well-trained, carefully selected, doing this job the way it's supposed to be done, and I stand by that.
And Susan,
sure.
No, I was just going to add to that again, we've taken a very active role in that. I speak to the superintendents all the time that if they're dissatisfied with the SRO for whatever reason, that they can contact me, and I'm happy to speak to the chief. And most of the superintendents that I deal with have good enough relationships with their chiefs that they go right to the chief and say, is this the right person for the assignment? Now, it happens so rarely because of all the training that we do. As Mo was saying, New Jersey also has their own Association of School Resource Officers. So not only have we had Nazareth come in, but we do training through the New Jersey Association as well, that it doesn't happen often. But you want to know if it's happening, because you want to, at least for me as a county prosecutor, I want to intervene if I think the assignment is not correct, because as good SROs do phenomenal work. But like everybody has said, if you have the wrong person in the wrong assignment, I don't care what that assignment is, you're going to get less than optimal results. So communication is part of that as well, making sure that everybody's comfortable with that level of communication. I tell my SROs all the time that it's not a secret that I'm in touch with your superintendents about the work that you're doing and the relationships that you're building. And at least from my perspective, all those communications have been very good, and they're very happy with the way that the program has run. And I think most of that is because of the training that Mo has talked about.
Susan, can I offer something here? I noticed too in some of the questions that were coming up, kind of a running thread of either personnel in the school have rebuffed having law enforcement officers or folks in uniform. Like that, I'm definitely seeing a thread, people kind of asking, hey, what do you do about that? And Chris said something interesting in the beginning, because he referred to, all of our students, like it's our students that we're taking care of. And I think there's an element of signaling that's important from the top here with respect to seeing our SROs as health and safety, if not wellness officers. Yes, there's a law enforcement component, but that's not the primary component these days. I mean, if we think about this going back to Columbine, right, there were school violence, SROs kind of appeared. And, in New Jersey, then we had the wellness issue of the opioids and that sort of thing. Now we've got, coronavirus issues. I think it's really, really important that the folks at the top message the availability of school resource officers as part of a wellness team for the building and for the individuals inside of it. Wellness is safety. Wellness is law enforcement. It's all there. But, there's a social emotional learning component that the SROs feed, just like your counselor would, or just like, maybe your school administration does, that I think is really, really important. I would point out the fact that in our particular district, right after the Parkland shooting happened, our relationship with the police department was so fluid and positive at that point that the police chief said immediately, I'm putting 2 additional officers in your building. We'll see whether it's temporarily or not. And there was a little bit of a question, hey, is this the direction that does it make it look like our school is being, people threw around the term militarized or becoming a police state. And the reality was those minority voices were overwhelmed by, this is great. This is more of our community inside our community. This is a wellness statement. This is a safety statement. This is not a law enforcement statement. And I think it's incumbent upon district leadership to message that accordingly. And I think folks who are feeling that pushback, and again, I saw a few questions that kind of spoke to it. I'd advise them to kind of go down that path a little bit more. I mean, as Anthony said, it's a rare occasion that the law enforcement side is being applied to its fullest. It's more often all the other tools and the assets.
And I know we had received a lot of questions from registrants before the webinar, and a lot of them focused on the role of SROs with bullying situations in school. And I know that one of the things now with the rise of the internet and social media, that a lot of kids are struggling, with being bullied. And I think SROs can also be, bring that sense of safety to a school, because if a kid has a confidant, or has somebody that they can trust and knows that they're keeping the school safe, as a safe environment for them. Because Anthony and I, a few years ago, did a training for the SROs on screening and brief interventions, trying to get kids who are, maybe using or trying out drugs and alcohol. And to me, I was shocked, because I was sitting down and having conversations with the SROs, and they were telling me about these incredible relationships they have with these kids. And for some of these kids, this is that positive adult in their lives that they don't have anywhere else. So again, I think we're actually close to running out of time, and I know we have some housekeeping issues at the end, but everyone who has attended, I hope and actually I'll ask the panelists if there's any final thoughts or anything you've seen in the questions that you'd like to address before we conclude. Just go ahead or let me know.
The only thing I'd say about I'm sorry, very quickly, Susan. The only thing I'd say about the relationships is, you know, the SROs, if they stay in place for a while, are a real consistent and a constant presence in students' lives. And we think about teachers are impactful, but they're often year to year, right? There are very few people in the school system who are continuous for that student at every point in their educational experience. So don't undervalue that placement. That person has a larger impact than we might at first think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is keep at it. You know, I saw a number of questions about what if, and Will had commented on it, but what about if I'm not getting that result immediately? It took me years of working with superintendents before I was invited to the roundtable meeting. You know, it takes time, it takes effort. You want to build a relationship. Keep at it. In terms of supervision and supervisors, you know, sometimes it is difficult because there's a lot going on in these offices and in these buildings. But if our young people aren't the most important thing that we're focused on, we need to keep at that and keep communicating that. And to be honest, I think the genuineness of that comes through. It's no, I want to work with the schools, and I want to work with kids, and I want to make sure that everybody is well in that school environment, like Will was saying. And you know, eventually you get through it. You do break through. So even if it appears that you're not, keep at it. Just keep at it. That would be my last piece of advice.
And it's a chance to, you know, be there, but also to, you know, identify problems, small problems before they become the big problems, and really kind of resolve things without having to go to court. So again, I thank each and every one of you for being a part of this. I think you're going to get a follow-up. I know you're going to get a follow-up phone call and email from me, because I think we've just started something, because I think there's a lot more that we can be covering in this, and I hope you are going to be available. And again, I just want to let our participants know that if you'd like to sign up for the our mailing list, you can send an email here to Courtney Jan, and I know John Rosiak said he's going to send the piece he wrote about SROs and their role during COVID. So we'll get that out to you. And so now I think I hand it over to William. The one final thing I wanted to say, we put it in the chat. For the attorneys out there, this presentation has been approved for 1 CLE. And also please fill out the evaluations, and please include in there what you would like to see us doing in further webinars or trainings. And who knows, we might be going back to some live training soon too, so that would be great. So thank you, everybody. Hope you got something out of this, and please let us know what else we can be covering on this very, very important issue.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. And again, thank you so much to all of the participants who have joined today and those who are on. I do want to allow for just a couple of quick reminders for folks before we adjourn today. While I'm doing these reminders, I'm going to go ahead and put up the PDF of today's presentation. I know some people, I think, had issues getting access to the PDF, so I'm just going to share that again with folks, just to make sure that you all can get access to that PDF as we file out of the virtual line room here. But again, really quickly, for those looking to get in contact with NTTAC, you may do so through the information that is displayed on this screen. If you would like to get in contact with the OJJDP TTA Help Desk or learn more about JuveJust or even any upcoming events, please note the information on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if you do, you can submit your inquiry or request, to the TTA 360 platform. To access the TTA 360 platform, you may follow the URL on this slide. Just a reminder that archived webinars are indeed available on our YouTube page, as well as other webinars on juvenile justice and child victimization prevention related topics. To get any supporting materials, you will just contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk at the email address located on this slide. Also, finally, please note that if you liked this particular webinar, well, our colleagues with NTTAC have a multitude of other webinars coming up soon as well that we would love for you all to join us for. One including the Social Media 101 webinar set for February 8th that's coming up. That is available for you all to register, so please take a moment to register for that webinar. We also have part 2 of Social Media 101 for prosecutors coming up on the 17th as well. So please be sure to register for both of these webinars. And then also note that we do have a couple of webinars for OJJDP as well for solicitations that are currently being offered through OJJDP. Those webinars are coming up soon and you can register for them as well. And then finally, we have a webinar with our colleagues with Street Law, Introduction of Legal Life Skills for Juveniles that's coming up on the 10th that you can register for as well. Also, for those, please don't forget to click on the link that was provided during today's webinar. That link is an evaluation link where you can fill out the evaluation for NTTAC and provide feedback. So please take a moment to click on that link and provide feedback and take today's evaluation. My co-host has put that link back in the chat for folks, so please take a moment to click on that before you log out as well for today's webinar. And then finally, a quick poll question that we have for the audience. Before we wrap up, this is a standard OJJDP poll question that we provide our audience today. We just basically want to know, how do you plan to apply the information that you learned from today's webinar? Please note that this poll is multiple choice, so you could just take a few moments to provide us that information and let us know, how do you plan to apply the information that you learned here as well. So yes, take a moment to fill out that evaluation link there, complete this poll question. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.